The Bayou's End Trailer Park, tucked away on the southern fringe of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was a place time and hope had forgotten. Rust-streaked metal homes, bleached by sun and tropical rain, stood in tight rows like crooked teeth in a broken jaw. Above them, a tangled web of makeshift electrical wires sagged, buzzing ominously whenever a breeze swept in from the swamps. The air was thick, a heavy cocktail of burnt motor oil, cheap Miller High Life, and the unnameable scent of generational despair. This was where dreams came to die. Devontae Flood woke not to the sun, but to the shuddering groan of his refrigerator. The old Kenmore, a relic from the 90s, was dying, each cooling cycle a noisy, labored struggle. He couldn't throw it out. Tossing it meant buying a new one, and money was a luxury the Flood household simply didn't possess. He forced his eyes open, a gritty sensation under the lids. His watch read 6 a.m. Too early to be up when you didn't have a job. And today, like most days, he didn't. Beside him, Almeda, his wife, slept soundly, her breathing even and peaceful. She was an island of calm in the storm of his life. Her shift started at 8 Alls. First, cleaning rooms at the Starlight Inn, where the bed sheets always told sordid stories. Then, she'd head to City Sud's laundromat for a second shift. 12 hours on her feet for minimum wage, a pathetically small price for the slow erosion of her body and spirit. Devontae looked at his wife, but the tenderness that had been there 5 years ago was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. They'd married young when he still believed in the promise of hard work. He'd get a steady job at the chemical plant, she'd finish her nursing courses, and they'd buy a small house with a white picket fence in a quiet suburb, far from this hellhole. That dream was now as rotted as the floorboards beneath their feet. It had shattered, piece by painful piece, with every layoff, every unpaid bill, and the bitterness that had taken root in his soul. He slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound that might wake her. He didn't want to face her eyes, that mixture of love, exhaustion, and a disappointment she tried so hard to hide. In the bathroom's yellow-stained mirror, a gaunt face with bloodshot eyes stared back at him. It was the face of a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. Lately, he'd been waking up drenched in sweat, his clothes soaked as if he'd run a marathon in his sleep. His muscles ached, a deep, persistent soreness, and his mouth was so dry it felt like he'd swallowed a handful of sand. He told himself it was just the cheap whiskey and the stress of a shit life. Just a shit life, he muttered, his voice a gravelly whisper. He opened the medicine cabinet. Inside were his familiar companions, Tylenol, Advil, the over-the-counter painkillers he bought at Walgreens. He dry-swallowed 2 capsules, chasing them with a gulp of tap water that tasted heavily of chlorine. The discomfort would usually subside after a while, at least enough for him to pretend that everything was okay. But deep down, a cold fear was taking hold, a sense that something far worse than poverty was slowly, methodically consuming him from the inside out. Almeda woke up as Devontae was sitting in their cramped kitchen, stirring a cup of instant coffee. Its aroma wasn't strong enough to mask the trailer's musty smell. "Good morning," she said, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Her voice was already tired. "You going out today?" "Probably," Devontae answered vaguely, avoiding her gaze. Gilani said his cousin might have some work for him at the construction site on Airline Highway. Almeda nodded, but her eyes were clouded with doubt. Devontae was bringing money home less and less, and his excuses were wearing thin. Gilani and his opportunities never amounted to anything. "I'm on until 9 tonight," she said, pulling her faded light blue maid's uniform from the closet. "There's leftover beans and chicken in the fridge. Make sure you eat something." Devontae didn't answer. He just stirred his black coffee, staring out the window at another sweltering Louisiana day. He knew he wouldn't be interested in beans and chicken tonight. He had other plans. Plans Almeda could never know about. Plans that involved the old gym bag hidden under their bed, and a dark secret that was burning a hole through him. A secret far more dangerous than any knife or gun. The moment the rumble of Almeda's 1998 Toyota Corolla faded down the road, Devontae moved with an urgency he never showed in his wife's presence. He reached under the bed, into the damp, musty space, and pulled out a worn-out Nike gym bag. The zipper was broken on one side. Inside, wrapped carefully in multiple Ziploc bags, was a package of fine white powder. This was his insurance policy, his one ticket out of the suffocating helplessness that gnawed at him daily. For the last 6 months, he'd been reselling small quantities of cocaine he sourced from a dealer in New Orleans' Ninth Ward. He wasn't a major player, just a small-time middleman, making enough to cover a few bills, buy a decent bottle of whiskey, and, most importantly, maintain the illusion that he was still in control of his own life, and his life was almost always out of control. Devante carefully measured out a small amount on a tiny digital scale he kept hidden in a shoebox, then divided it into smaller baggies. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a sick, nervous excitement. This was his work, a job that required precision and discretion. He stashed the larger bag back in its hiding place, took a quick, cold shower, and stepped out of the trailer. The July heat of Louisiana hit him immediately, a wet, woolen blanket of humidity. It was so thick you could feel it in your lungs. The sky was a merciless, cloudless blue, and the sun was a giant fireball intent on scorching everything beneath it. The heat spared no one, especially not those who couldn't afford a decent air conditioner. Devante walked towards Galani's trailer, 3 lots down, his only real friend in this god-forsaken place. Jelani was sitting on his cracked concrete steps, sipping a Budweiser despite the early hour. He was wiry, wearing a stained white tank top that revealed a tapestry of crude tattoos on his arms. "Out of work again, my brother?" Galani asked, a smirk in his voice, as he handed Devante a can from the cooler beside him. "You too," Devante shot back, cracking the can open and taking a long swallow. The cold beer soothed his parched throat. "Any word from your cousin?" "Screw that dude," Jelani grumbled. "He's my blood, but he treats me like dirt. And that white foreman, Billy, he's always looking at me and the other black guys like we're about to steal something, pays pennies and works you like a dog. I got a better idea." Devante immediately grew wary. Jelani's better ideas usually involved a stupid level of risk and ended at the police precinct. "What idea?" he asked, though he already had a bad feeling. "I got the keys to that construction supply warehouse on Main," Jelani whispered, his eyes darting around like a nervous ferret. "My dumbass cousin dropped them. Place is full of DeWalt drills, saws, welders, top-shelf stuff. No security guards at night, just some cheap Chinese cameras that are probably just for show. We get in, grab a few things, flip them for a couple grand. Easy money." "No." Devante shook his head instantly, decisively. "I'm not getting into that shit. I'm still on probation for that fight last year, you forget? Probation ain't prison, not till you get caught." Galani shrugged, his expression a mask of indifference. "Suit yourself. Stay here in this pigsty and wait for your wife to bring home the bacon then." The words were a knife, twisting in the wound of Devante's pride. Devante drained his beer in silence, crushing the can in his fist. He stood up, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over him, a sensation that was becoming all too familiar. "I got money," he said, his voice laced with a false bravado to hide the sting of Galani's words. "Just not from doing stupid shit like that." Galani just grunted, not saying another word. They both knew Devante had his own business, but they never discussed the details. It was an unspoken rule. Devante wanted no part of Galani's impulsive schemes, and Jelani didn't want to know too much about Devante's mysterious source of income. That silence was a form of respect, or maybe just self-preservation. Devante turned and walked away, leaving Galani with his beer and his resentment. He walked down the dusty dirt path, the oppressive heat making his head throb. He needed money, but not like that. The warehouse job was too risky, too sloppy. His way, while still illegal, was quieter. He was in control. At least, that's what he told himself. He had no idea that turning down Jelani's offer wasn't a step towards safety. It was just a step onto a different, more treacherous path. He thought he was carving his own way, but he was really just walking deeper into the darkness. At the other end of the Bayou's End trailer park, in a rundown, single-room efficiency she rented for $150 a week in cash, Aisha Dunley was applying lipstick in front of a cracked mirror. The crack ran right through her reflection, splitting her face in two. Aisha was 3 years younger than Almeda, and while her sister possessed the sturdy, enduring beauty of a woman accustomed to hard labor, Aisha had a sharper, wilder kind of attractiveness. She was slimmer, with high cheekbones, large, expressive eyes, and full lips that she was now painting a vibrant cherry red. But life, like the mirror, had not been kind to her beauty. After barely graduating high school, she drifted through a series of dead-end jobs. Cashier at a gas station, waitress at a 24-hour diner. She finally landed at the Rusty Nail, a name that said it all. It was a dark, grimy bar that perpetually smelled of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and broken promises. The job sucked, but they paid cash every night and never asked for a social security number. The tips were decent, especially when she smiled at certain regulars, lonely, middle-aged men with hungry eyes, and didn't flinch when their hands accidentally brushed against her waist. Sometimes those brushes led to extra income at the Starlight Inn across the street, the same motel, ironically, where her sister cleaned up the evidence left behind by encounters just like hers. Aisha wasn't proud of it. Each time she felt a small piece of herself die, but her options were limited. It was either sell a little bit of her dignity or not have enough money for rent. She always chose the latter. College was a fantasy, a fairy tale for other girls, the kind who had parents in a safety net. Her own mother had died of an overdose when Aisha was 15 and Almeda was 18. They'd never known their father. Since then, the two sisters had survived on their own. They used to be close, relying on each other for everything, but life and their different choices had driven a wedge between them. Aisha's relationship with Almeda was complicated. Almeda was always the right one. She worked 2 jobs, paid her taxes, went to church on Sundays. She had married Devante, hoping for stability, but in Aisha's view, all she got was another burden. Aisha thought her sister was wasting her life on a lazy, good-for-nothing man. She loved her sister, pitied her, but also felt a simmering resentment toward Almeda's righteousness. It felt like a silent judgment on her own life. Finished with her makeup, Aisha sipped her instant coffee and stared at the bills spread out on her small table. Rent, electricity, the cheapest, almost useless health insurance plan, and her phone bill. Money was terrifyingly tight. Lately, the regulars at the bar had gotten cheap with their tips, and the extra appointments were becoming fewer and farther between. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Just as she was about to leave, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't the landlord's impatient rap, nor a friend's casual tap. It was a confident, almost arrogant knock. She opened the door a crack and frowned. Devante Flood stood on her doorstep, a half smirk on his face, a bottle of cheap Old Crow whiskey in his hand. "What the hell are you doing here?" Aisha asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. She didn't invite him in, her body blocking the doorway. "Does Almeda know you're at my place?" "She's at work till late," Devante smirked, easing his way past her into the room as if he owned the place. "I thought we could have a little fun." "I have to go to work," Aisha replied coolly, stepping back. "Come on, you've got almost 2 hours," he said, placing the bottle on the table, right next to her pile of bills. He glanced at them, then back at her. "I hear you're having some money trouble." Aisha tensed instantly. How did he know? She hadn't told anyone, not even her sister. "I can help," Devante continued, pulling a crumpled wad of bills from his pocket. He peeled off a few and laid them on the table. $200, just for your company." "I don't sleep with my sister's husband," Aisha snapped, though her eyes were glued to the green bills. That was this week's rent and some groceries. "Who said anything about sleeping?" Devante grinned, a slick, predatory smile. "Just a drink, a little conversation. Almeda will never know." He moved closer. Aisha could smell his cologne, cheap but pleasant, mixed with the faint scent of the beer he'd had earlier. There was something in his confidence, in the way he looked at her, not as his wife's little sister, but as a desirable woman that made her hesitate. $250, Devante said, adding another $50 bill to the pile. "And I'll help you with next month's rent." Aisha's resolve crumbled. Logic and loyalty were buried under the weight of her overdue bills. She snatched the money and shoved it into the pocket of her jeans. The feel of the cash was both a relief and a source of self-loathing. "Just whiskey." "Nothing else," she said, her voice firm as she reached for 2 glasses. Devante smiled, a triumphant, knowing smile. He knew, and she knew, this was just the beginning. She had opened the door for him, and once you let the devil in, he doesn't leave easily. Absolutely. Here are the next parts of the story, continuing in the same style and tone. That afternoon marked the beginning of their sordid little arrangement. Devante started coming over once a week, always on the days Almeda worked a double shift. He always brought money and a bottle of whiskey. At first, it was just like Aisha had insisted. They just talked and drank. He would complain about his life, his lack of work, and even, sometimes, about Almeda. Aisha would listen, sipping the whiskey that burned its way down her throat, feeling a perverse sense of satisfaction. She told herself she was just a paid-for ear, a temporary escape for a desperate man. Then, the talking turned to touching, a hand on her knee as he laughed at a joke, his fingers brushing against hers as he refilled her glass. The touches became more deliberate, the silences between them charged with a different kind of energy. Soon, there were kisses, sloppy, whiskey-fueled kisses that tasted of desperation and betrayal, and eventually, inevitably, they ended up in her bed. Aisha told herself she was doing it for the money. The cash he gave her was a lifeline, the only thing keeping her from being evicted. But if she were being honest with herself, there was another reason, a darker, more shameful one. There was a twisted pleasure in taking something from her older sister, the perfect one, the one who always seemed to be judging her. Sleeping with Devante was an act of rebellion, a way to secretly tear a thread in the fabric of Almeda's seemingly stable life. It made them equals in imperfection, partners in a dirty secret. For Devante, the affair was a potent cocktail of ego and escape. His marriage to Almeda had long ago devolved into a silent routine of shared bills and quiet resentment. They barely spoke, and their intimacy had all but vanished. With Aisha, it was different. It was passionate, forbidden, and dangerous. It made him feel powerful, desired, and in control, even as his life was spiraling out of it. He never stayed the night, and he always paid in cash, reinforcing the transactional nature of their relationship. It kept things simple, he thought. No messy emotions. One sweltering August afternoon, after leaving Aisha's trailer, Devante felt worse than usual. It wasn't just the familiar post-whiskey haze. A deep chill ran through his bones, despite the oppressive heat, and a strange, itchy rash had appeared on his chest. He'd been noticing things for a while now, subtle signs that his body was failing him, the constant bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure, the night sweats that left his sheets clammy and cold, the unexplained weight loss that made his clothes hang loosely on his frame. But he never went to a doctor. He had no insurance, and a clinic visit meant bills he couldn't pay. Besides, what was the point? It was probably just a lingering flu, or his body finally buckling under the stress of his lousy life. So, he self-medicated. He'd buy handfuls of pills from the pharmacy, painkillers, fever reducers, anything that promised relief, and wash them down with whiskey or beer. The symptoms would recede for a while, but they always came back, a little stronger each time. The most important thing was to hide it from Almeda. She was the type to worry, to fuss. She would drag him to a clinic, and there would be questions, tests, and bills. Worse, there would be the truth. And the truth was a monster he wasn't ready to face. So he kept his secret locked away, another toxic element festering in the suffocating confines of their trailer, a poison seeping not just into his body, but into the very foundation of his life. He didn't realize that by trying to outrun his own illness, he was leading everyone he touched straight into its path. Aisha, too, began to notice the changes in her own body. At first, they were small things, easily dismissed. A persistent tiredness she blamed on long nights at the smoky bar. Aching muscles she attributed to being on her feet for hours. Then came the frequent colds, the kind that settled deep in her chest and refused to leave for weeks. "Life's hard for everyone," she'd mutter to her cracked mirror, popping another couple of aspirin. She was working hard, not getting enough sleep. It was normal to feel run down, but one night, the feeling was anything but normal. She was weaving through the crowded bar, carrying a tray of beer bottles for a table of loud, drunk truckers, when a wave of profound weakness washed over her. The room began to spin, the raucous laughter and blaring jukebox music fading into a dull roar in her ears. Her hands trembled, and the tray of bottles slipped from her grasp, crashing to the sticky floor in a symphony of shattering glass and foaming beer. The bartender, a burly man named Sal, took one look at her pale, sweating face and sent her home. "You look like a walking corpse, kid," he said, not unkindly. "Go get some rest." Shaking and disoriented, Aisha stumbled out into the cool night air. The short walk back to her trailer felt like crossing a desert. She collapsed onto her bed without even taking off her clothes and slept for 14 straight hours. But when she woke, she felt just as shattered, as if the sleep had only given her fatigue a deeper hold. Her reflection in the mirror was terrifying. A pale, gaunt face with dark, hollowed-out eyes. She looked sick, truly sick. "Gotta quit the night shifts," she mumbled, her voice hoarse as she swallowed more aspirin. Just then, there was a knock on the door. It was a familiar knock, at a familiar time, on a familiar day of the week. Aisha knew who it was. A part of her wanted to pretend she wasn't home, to just lie there in the dark. But the rent was due tomorrow. Devante stood on the doorstep with his usual kit, a bottle of whiskey and a wad of cash. "You look terrible," he said, his words a substitute for a greeting. "Thanks for the compliment," Aisha snapped back, her patience worn thin by her illness. "I don't feel well. Let's do this another time." Devante frowned. He wasn't feeling his best either, the ever-present ache in his joints more pronounced today. But he hadn't come all this way to be turned away. "I got $300, he said, holding out the money. "And that fancy whiskey you like, the Maker's Mark." Aisha hesitated. $300. That would cover her rent and give her a cushion, especially now that she'd missed a shift. The thought of not having to stress about money for a few weeks was a powerful lure. "Okay," she relented, taking the bills from his hand. The paper felt both like a salvation and a condemnation. "But just a drink. I'm serious, Devante. I'm in no shape for anything else." He nodded, hiding his disappointment. He sauntered into the room and sat in the only armchair while Aisha found 2 clean glasses. "Does Almeda suspect anything?" she asked, pouring the amber liquid. The question was part of their ritual, a way to acknowledge the danger and, perversely, to heighten the thrill. "Nah," Devante grinned, but there was no humor in it. "She's too busy with her 2 jobs and her dreams of a better life." A raw, unconcealed sneer crept into his voice. Aisha flinched. She didn't like it when he talked about her sister that way. No matter how complicated their relationship was, Almeda was still her only family. "You should try getting a decent job, you know," Aisha said, the whiskey giving her a brief flash of courage. "She's pulling double shifts and you're doing... what?" "Don't start," Devante warned, his good mood vanishing. "I have my own ways of making money. Where do you think I get the cash for you?" Aisha didn't press the issue. She suspected his business was illegal, but she preferred not to know the details. It was safer that way. Ignorance was a shield. They sat and drank in silence for a while. Devante stole glances at Aisha. She did look sick. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and her eyes were inflamed. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. Maybe he'd given her his flu. A pang of something, guilt maybe, pricked at him, but he pushed it away. Oh well, she's tough. She'll get over it. He was living, wasn't he? Aisha caught his gaze and managed a weak smile. Despite all his flaws, there was something about him that drew her in. Maybe it was the danger he radiated, or maybe it was just the way he looked at her, not as his wife's screw-up sister, but as a woman he wanted. "One more, and then we're done," she said, refilling their glasses. "I gotta try and work tomorrow." Devante nodded, but he was already mentally calculating how to talk her into more. After all, he hadn't brought $300 just for conversation. His needs had to be met. The whiskey, the money, the secrecy. It was all a transaction, and he was determined to get what he paid for. Of course. Here is the continuation of the story. The clinic on the outskirts of Baton Rouge didn't inspire confidence. It was housed in a low, drab building with peeling paint, cracked linoleum floors, and dim fluorescent bulbs that flickered under the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow light on everything. But it was the only place Aisha could get medical care without insurance or too many questions. A free government program for the poor. It was the last refugee for those who had nowhere else to turn. Aisha sat on a hard plastic chair in the hallway, her foot tapping a nervous rhythm on the floor. It had been a week since she'd had her blood drawn, and today she was here for the results. Her condition was only getting worse. The weakness was constant now, a heavy cloak she couldn't shrug off. The night sweats left her sheets soaked, and a strange blotchy rash had spread across her torso. Fear, cold and sharp, gnawed at her insides, but she tried to push the dark thoughts away. It's just mono, she told herself. Or a bad infection. Dunley, a nurse with a tired, impassive face, looked out from an office door, checking a clipboard. Aisha Dunley. Aisha stood up, her knees feeling weak. The inside of the office smelled of antiseptic and old paper. Behind a cluttered desk sat a middle-aged woman with kind, weary eyes that had seen too much human suffering. "Please, have a seat, Miss Dunley," the doctor said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "I'm Dr. Wilson. I have your test results." Something in her tone, calm, detached, tinged with a professional sympathy, made Aisha's entire body go rigid. She'd heard that voice before, in movies, right before a doctor delivers a devastating diagnosis. "How bad is it?" Aisha asked, her own voice a thin whisper. Dr. Wilson looked her straight in the eye. "Aisha, your HIV test came back positive." The world froze. The humming of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of traffic, the ticking of the clock on the wall, it all vanished, as if someone had hit the mute button on reality. Aisha saw the doctor's lips moving, but the words were a meaningless blur. Only one thought echoed in the sudden, terrifying silence of her mind. "This is a mistake. It can't be true. Not me." "And so sorry," Dr. Wilson's voice finally broke through the fog. "HIV?" Aisha repeated the word, as if saying it aloud might change it. Am I dying?" "HIV is not a death sentence anymore, Aisha," Dr. Wilson said gently. "With the right treatment, you can live a long, relatively normal life. We have medications, antiretroviral therapy, that can control the virus and prevent it from destroying your immune system." Aisha was only half listening. The words "normal life" sounded like a cruel joke. Her life was over. HIV. Those 3 letters would now define her entire existence. "How?" she managed to choke out, swallowing the lump in her throat. "How could I have gotten it?" "HIV is transmitted through blood, semen, vaginal fluids, and breast milk," Dr. Wilson recited mechanically. "The most common routes are unprotected sex and sharing needles for drug use." Aisha closed her eyes, and a slideshow of faces flashed through her mind. The handful of clients from the bar, the casual encounters at the Starlight Inn, and Devante, especially Devante, the one constant in her life for the past few months. "Do I need to inform my partners?" she asked quietly. "That's your personal choice, but I strongly recommend it," the doctor nodded. "It's a moral and public health responsibility. They need to get tested. Your loved ones could be infected right now and not even know it." Aisha pictured telling Almeda that not only had she been sleeping with her husband, but she might have given both of them HIV. The thought made a wave of nausea roll through her stomach. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small and lost. "Right now, we're going to talk about your treatment options," Dr. Wilson said, her voice becoming practical, grounding. "There are programs for people without insurance." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Aisha nodded, signed papers, and received prescriptions and pamphlets filled with information she couldn't process. It all felt deeply unreal, like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. When she left the clinic, she just stood on the sidewalk, disoriented, not knowing where to go. Cars drove by, people bustled past, life going on for everyone but her. Her cell phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Sal, her boss. "Where are you?" "Shift started an hour ago." Aisha turned the phone off. She couldn't face anyone. She made her way home on autopilot, locked the door, drew the curtains, and collapsed onto her bed, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts swirled in her head, each one darker than the last. Who infected me? When did it happen? How long do I have left? How will I pay for the medicine? Who can I tell? There were no answers, only a vast, crushing emptiness and a fear so profound it felt like it was swallowing her whole. Aisha woke the next morning with eyes swollen from crying and a new steely resolve forming in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't change her diagnosis, but she had to find out who gave it to her. She had to warn them. She had to know. The list of potential sources wasn't as long as one might think. In the past year, there were 4 regulars from the bar she'd sometimes met at the motel. And then there was Devante. With the clients, she'd always been careful, always insisted on protection. But with Devante, it was different. He was her sister's husband. Somehow, illogically, that had created an illusion of safety. Aisha decided to start with the clients, calling them under the pretense of seeing them again, and gently probing to see if any of them were sick was a terrible plan. But it was the only one she had. The first 2 calls yielded nothing. Both men sounded perfectly normal, eager to meet, with no hint of illness in their voices. The third didn't answer. The fourth, a trucker from Lafayette named Ray, told her he was on a long haul to Florida and wouldn't be back for a week. "I was just calling to see if you were okay," Aisha said, trying to sound casual. "Why, baby, you worried about me." Ray chuckled on the other end of the line. "I'm fine as frog's hair, just my back is killing me from all this driving." "Just asking," she said evasively. "See you when you get back." Hanging up, Aisha felt a knot of dread tighten in her chest. If it wasn't them, that left only one person. The thought that her sister's husband had given her a death sentence made her feel physically ill. And if he had infected her, that meant Almeda was also in danger. Or maybe she was already infected too. Aisha knew she had to confront Devante, but she needed more than just a suspicion. She needed something concrete. For the first time in 2 days, she left her trailer and headed to the Piggly Wiggly supermarket. She needed to buy groceries and, more importantly, fill the prescriptions the doctor had given her. Dark, heavy clouds were gathering over the city, promising a thunderstorm. The weather matched her mood perfectly. Inside the store, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Aisha ran into Marcus, a mutual acquaintance who sometimes bought cocaine from Devante. They weren't friends, just exchanged nods when they saw each other. But today, Marcus seemed unusually chatty. "Hey, Aisha, haven't seen you around," he said, stopping his cart next to hers. "How you been?" "Fine," she answered curtly, not in the mood for small talk. "Devante ain't been around much lately either," Marcus continued, oblivious to her demeanor. "Everything okay with you guys?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Aisha snapped, then softened her tone. Maybe Marcus knew something. "Why are you looking for him?" "Just business," Marcus answered evasively. "I was just wondering, I hoped he wasn't having the same problems as LaShonda." LaShonda. Aisha tensed. The name was familiar. Devante had mentioned her once, a long time ago. An old girlfriend. "Yeah, his ex," Marcus nodded. "You don't know? Damn, I figured y'all were all tight." "Not really," Aisha answered cautiously. "What happened to her?" Marcus looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, and lowered his voice. "She died, about a month ago. AIDS. Man, I thought you knew." The ground seemed to fall away from under Aisha's feet. The brightly colored boxes of cereal on the shelves blurred into a meaningless smear of color. Devante's ex-girlfriend died of AIDS a month ago. It couldn't be a coincidence. "No," she managed to say, her voice miraculously steady. "No, I didn't know. I'm sorry to hear that." "Yeah, it's a messed up story," Marcus sighed. "That's why I was looking for Devante. They were together for a long time, before your sister. He ought to get himself checked out." "Of course," Aisha nodded numbly. I'll tell him if I see him." Marcus said his goodbyes and wheeled his cart away, leaving Aisha standing in the middle of the aisle, paralyzed by a sickening realization. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Devante had been with a woman who died of AIDS. Devante himself had been looking sick. His strange symptoms, his constant pill popping. Aisha abandoned her shopping cart and ran out of the store. She needed to talk to Devante. Right now, not on the phone, face to face. She knew Almeda was working her double shift. Devante would be home, alone. The first drops of rain began to fall as she raced toward his trailer, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. "You got it. Here's the next explosive part of the story." The rain had started in earnest by the time she reached the flood's trailer. Heavy, fat drops hammered on the metal roof, creating an ominous drumbeat that echoed the frantic pounding in her chest. She knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping sharply against the flimsy aluminum. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time, calling his name. "Devante, it's Aisha! Open up!" Only silence answered, punctuated by the roar of the downpour. But then she remembered. The spare key. Almeda always kept a spare key hidden under the chipped ceramic flower pot by the steps. They may not have been close anymore, but they still shared these small, intimate secrets from their past. Aisha's hand trembled as she reached under the pot, her fingers closing around the cold, familiar metal. She let herself in. The trailer smelled of stale air, unwashed dishes, and something else. Something vaguely medicinal. Dirty plates and empty beer bottles littered the small kitchen table, a typical bachelor mess when the wife wasn't home. "Devante," Aisha called out, stepping deeper into the trailer. "You in here?" There was no reply, but she could hear the sound of the shower running in the small bathroom at the back. He was home. Aisha decided to wait for him in the living room, but her eyes were drawn to the kitchen counter. Next to a half-empty bag of potato chips sat Devante's medicine cabinet, its mirrored door left ajar. Something compelled her to look inside. It was filled with the usual clutter: a rusty razor, shaving cream, a bottle of Tylenol. But behind them, tucked away, were several prescription pill bottles. These weren't from Walgreens. They had official pharmacy labels with his name printed clearly: Devante Flood. She picked one up and read the name of the medication, then a second and a third. The blood in her veins turned to ice. These were not ordinary painkillers or antibiotics. They were antiretrovirals, drugs for people with HIV, the very same class of medications Dr. Wilson had told her about. With shaking hands, Aisha put the vials back in their place. All doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, searing rage. He knew. Devante knew his diagnosis. He knew, and he had kept silent. He knew, and he had continued to sleep with her, unprotected. He knew, and he had been sharing a bed with her sister every night. The sound of the water in the bathroom stopped. Aisha froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. What should she do? A primal instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of there, to disappear. But another part of her, the part that was now fueled by a white-hot fury, refused to move. She wanted to stay. She wanted to see his face when he realized she knew his monstrous secret. The decision was made for her when the bathroom door opened and Devante stepped out, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist, water dripping from his hair onto his shoulders. He looked surprised, then annoyed to see her. "Aisha? What the hell are you doing in here?" She didn't answer. She just pointed a trembling finger at the medicine cabinet on the counter. "I know you have HIV, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "And I know that you know." Devante's face went blank for a second, then twisted into a mask of fury. "You were going through my shit?" he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "I just found out that I have it too," Aisha said, the rage inside her finally boiling over. "And you're the only one it could have been. The only one." Devante's eyes darted away, unable to meet her gaze. That single cowardly gesture was an admission of guilt more eloquent than any words. "I ran into Marcus at the store," Aisha continued, her voice rising with every word. "He told me about LaShonda. He told me she died of AIDS a month ago. You knew, didn't you? You knew all along," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "And you kept sleeping with me, and with my sister." "It's not that simple," Devante started, trying to find an excuse. I wasn't sure." "Don't you lie to me," Aisha shrieked, pointing at the pill bottles. "You're on antiretrovirals. You knew your diagnosis and you said nothing. You selfish bastard, you were poisoning us." Devante sighed, the fight draining out of him as he slumped into a kitchen chair. "Okay," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I knew. I found out a couple months ago, after LaShonda got real sick. Her doctors told me I needed to get tested. I did. It came back positive. And you didn't tell me? You didn't tell Almeda?" As Aisha felt her entire body shaking with a fury so intense it made her dizzy. "You just kept on, like nothing was wrong, infecting us?" "I was scared," Devante snapped, a sudden burst of anger returning. "You think it's easy to say something like that? Hey, by the way, I have HIV. Guess you probably have it too. I was hoping it would just go away, that it would be okay." Aisha stared at him, aghast. "You hoped? You hoped a deadly virus would just—" "Go away? Are you an idiot or are you just a monster?" Devante leaped from his chair, his face contorted with rage. "Don't you dare call me a monster," he snarled. "You have any idea what it's like to know you're sick, to know you could die? I was terrified." "And what about us?" Aisha screamed back, her voice raw. "What about Almeda, who works 2 jobs to support your sorry ass? What about me?" She took a step toward him, jabbing a finger into his bare chest. "You are a selfish, cowardly bastard. You don't deserve her. You don't deserve anyone. You deserve to die alone." It happened in a flash. Devante's hand shot out, and the open palm connected with her cheek with a sickening crack. Her head snapped to the side, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. "Shut up," he growled, his eyes burning with a feral light. "Just shut up! You don't understand anything." Aisha recoiled, clutching her cheek. The shock of the blow was quickly consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the first thing she could grab, a heavy glass ashtray from the coffee table. With a guttural scream, she hurled it at him. Devante ducked just in time, and the ashtray smashed against the thin wall behind him, showering the floor with glittering shards of glass. "You crazy bitch!" he yelled, lunging for her. Aisha scrambled backward, but her foot caught on the edge of the worn-out rug, and she tumbled to the floor. In a second, Devante was over her, his face a mask of hatred, his eyes burning with a desperate fury. "You think I like being sick?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. "You think I wanted this? I was just trying to live a normal life, as normal as I could. At everyone else's expense," Aisha spat, struggling beneath him. "At my sister's expense, at my expense." Devante grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. A sharp, searing pain shot through her scalp. "You're just as guilty as I am," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "Sleeping with your own sister's husband for money. What kind of sister does that?" The words hurt more than the slap, because they were laced with a venomous truth. Aisha had betrayed Almeda. She had taken money to sleep with her husband. It was a sordid, ugly fact. But cheating was one thing. Knowingly, silently passing on a deadly disease was another. It was a line she would never have crossed. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, she twisted her body and drove her knee up, hard, into his groin. Devante let out a strangled groan, and his grip loosened. It was all the chance she needed. Aisha rolled away and scrambled to her feet. Her eyes scanned the room for a weapon, for an escape. They landed on the kitchen counter, on the butcher block, where Almeda kept her knives. Without a second thought, she grabbed the largest one, a heavy chef's knife with a gleaming 8-inch blade. "Get out!" she said, her voice shaking, but her hand surprisingly steady as she pointed the knife at him. "Just get out of here before I call the cops." Devante straightened up, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain and rage. "This is my house," he gritted out through clenched teeth. "You're the one who needs to get out." He took a menacing step forward. Aisha gripped the handle of the knife tighter. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling. "I mean it, Devante." A cruel, ugly grin spread across his face. "You think you got the guts?" he taunted, taking another step. "Little girl with a knife. How scary." "Devante, I'm not kidding," Aisha pleaded, her voice cracking. "Stop." But he didn't stop. Step by slow, deliberate step, he advanced on her, his face a horrifying mixture of rage and amusement. "You know what I'm gonna do?" he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm gonna tell Almeda. I'm gonna tell her you came on to me, that you sleep around and you brought this thing into our family. Who do you think she's gonna believe, huh? Her husband or her whore of a sister?" Something inside Aisha broke. It was a final, shattering snap. All the fear of the past week, the shock of the diagnosis, the terror of death, the sting of his betrayal, the crushing weight of her own guilt. It all coalesced into a single blinding point of pure, uncontrollable rage. She didn't remember lunging forward. She didn't remember the feeling of the blade sinking into his flesh. She only remembered the look of stunned surprise on his face, his taunting grin vanishing, replaced by a wide-eyed disbelief. And then, the warmth of his blood, suddenly slick and hot on her hands. Devante staggered back, his hands flying to his stomach, where the dark wooden handle of the knife was now sticking out. his eyes, wide with shock, locked onto hers. "You," he started to say, but a gush of blood bubbled from his mouth, cutting off the word. He collapsed to his knees, still staring at her, a look of profound, final bewilderment on his face. Then he pitched forward onto his side and was still. Aisha stood over him, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The rain hammered on the roof, the only sound in the suddenly silent trailer. The reality of what she had done didn't sink in at once. She looked at her hands, covered in blood that was not her own. She looked at the motionless body on the floor, and she couldn't believe she had done it. "Devante?" she whispered as if he might answer her. But there was no answer. There was only the silence and the rain and the body of her sister's husband bleeding out on the cheap linoleum floor. The point of no return had been crossed. You got it. Here is the final arc of the story, focusing on the investigation and the aftermath. Detective Quincy Rosser sighed, the weary sound swallowed by the oppressive humidity inside the trailer. He looked down at the body of the young black man on the floor. Another life extinguished in one of Baton Rouge's forgotten neighborhoods. Another domestic dispute turned deadly. Another case that was probably open and shut. But the paperwork would be a nightmare all the same. Rosser was a veteran, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a face etched by years of seeing the worst of humanity. "What have we got, Jenkins?" he asked a young, eager officer who was scribbling notes in a small pad. "Victim is Devante Flood, 32, Jenkins replied, not looking up from his notes. "Discovered by his wife, Almeda Flood, when she returned from work at approximately 9:30 p.m. M.E. is calling it a single stab wound to the abdomen. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife, was still in the body." Rosser nodded, his practiced eyes scanning the crime scene. Small trailer, cheap furniture, empty beer bottles, signs of a struggle. "Textbook for this part of town," he muttered. "Wife a suspect?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir. She's got a rock-solid alibi. She was on the clock at the Starlight Inn from noon to 5 p.m., then at the City Suds laundromat until 9 p.m. Multiple witnesses at both locations." "So who then?" Rosser mused. "No sign of forced entry. The victim probably knew his killer. Let him right in." His gaze fell on the open medicine cabinet on the kitchen table. He stepped closer and, using his pen, nudged the vials. He read the labels. "Antiretrovirals," he murmured. "Our guy was HIV positive." "Think that's connected, sir?" Jenkins asked. "In my experience, a secret like that is a powerful motive for something," Rosser replied thoughtfully. "Where's the wife now?" "In a patrol car. Officer Rodriguez is with her. She's pretty broken up." "All right, I'll talk to her. You and your partner canvass the neighborhood. See if anyone saw or heard anything. Talk is cheap in a place like this." Stepping out of the trailer, Rosser headed to the patrol car where Almeda Flood sat, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands twisting the hem of her uniform blouse. "Mrs. Flood," Rosser began gently, "I'm Detective Quincy Rosser. I'm very sorry for your loss. I need to ask you a few questions." Almeda just looked up at him with a shattered expression and nodded. "I got home around 10, she began, her voice a low, trembling whisper. The door was unlocked. Devante always locks it. I walked in, and I saw him. There was blood everywhere. I screamed and ran to the neighbors. They called 911. Did your husband have any enemies, Mrs. Flood? Anyone he had a conflict with recently?" Almeda thought for a moment, shaking her head. "I don't think so. Devante, he was quiet, kept to himself mostly. He had friends, but I don't know of any serious fights." "What about his health?" Rosser asked cautiously. "We found medication in your home, Mrs. Flood. Antiretrovirals." Almeda's face crumpled in confusion, then horror. "What? What kind of drugs are those?" "They're for people with HIV, Rosser explained, watching her reaction carefully. "You didn't know?" Almeda covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. "No," she choked out. He never said anything. Oh my God." Rosser gave her a moment. "Is there anyone who might have known and might have wanted him dead because of it?" I really don't know," she stammered, still reeling from the shock. "You should talk to Galaney, his friend. He lives 2 trailers down. Maybe he knows something." She paused, then added, "And I have a sister, Aisha. She lives nearby, works at the Rusty Nail Bar." Rosser made a note. "All right, Mrs. Flood, we'll talk to them." Back inside, the forensics team was finishing up. "Anything interesting?" Rosser asked the lead tech. "Not much," he replied. "Prints are what you'd expect, victims and the wife's, but we did find this." He held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a single long black hair, caught on a shard of the broken ashtray. "Judging by the length, it's not the victim's, and Mrs. Flood has a shorter cut." "Good work," Rosser said. "Run it for DNA, and send a patrol car to the Rusty Nail. Find me Aisha Dunley." The next morning, Rosser sat in his office, a file open on his desk. The preliminary reports confirmed his gut feeling. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. Jenkins knocked and entered. "Sir, we interviewed the neighbors. One woman, a Mrs. Parker, claims she saw Aisha Dunley leaving the Flood's trailer around 6 p.m. on the day of the murder. Said Dunley looked spooked and upset, 3.5 hours before the wife found the body. Also," Jenkins added, "Dunley didn't show up for her shift last night, called in sick." "Where is she now?" Rosser asked, leaning forward. "In her trailer. Almeda Flood is with her." "Let's go pay the sisters a visit." Aisha Dunley's trailer was even smaller and more cramped than the Flood's. Almeda opened the door, looking even more exhausted than the night before. Inside, Aisha sat on the couch. Her eyes were red, and a faint, purplish bruise was visible on her cheek. "Aisha Dunley," Rosser began, "I need to ask you some questions about Devonte Flood." "He was my brother-in-law," she answered quietly, not looking up. "When was the last time you saw him?" Aisha hesitated, casting a fleeting glance at her sister. "I don't remember. Maybe a week ago." "That's strange," Rosser said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "Because your neighbor, Mrs. Parker, saw you leaving his trailer around 6 o'clock last night. Said you looked very upset." Almeda turned sharply to her sister. "What? You were at our place yesterday?" I stopped by," Aisha stammered. "I wanted to talk to him." "About what?" Rosser pressed. "It was personal, family business." "Your brother-in-law was murdered in that trailer a few hours later, Miss Dunley," Rosser said, his tone hardening. "All family business is now my business. How did you get that bruise on your cheek?" "I fell," Aisha lied, her eyes wide with panic. "At the bar." "Your boss said you weren't at work yesterday." Rosser let the silence hang in the air. "We also found a long black hair at the crime scene. I'm willing to bet the DNA will match yours." "I told you I was there," Aisha cried out. "Of course my hair could be there." "Aisha," Almeda pleaded, her voice breaking. "What is going on?" Before Aisha could answer, a knock came at the door. It was a patrol officer. "Detective, there's a guy out here, Galani Senegal. Says he has information about the murder, and he won't shut up about it." Rosser stepped outside. "I hear there's a reward," Galani began nervously. "If the information leads to an arrest, yes," Rosser said, his patience thin. "What do you know?" "Devonte and Aisha," Galani said, nodding toward the trailer. "They were sleeping together, for months, behind Almeda's back. He was paying her for it." Rosser raised an eyebrow. "And that's not all," Galani continued, lowering his voice. "Devonte was sick, HIV. He found out after his ex, LaShonda, died of AIDS. But he didn't tell anyone, not Almeda, not Aisha, just kept on sleeping with both of them." The final ugly piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Rosser went back inside. "Miss Dunley," he said, his voice now devoid of any gentleness. "I have a witness who says you were having a paid affair with Devonte Flood." Almeda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What? Aisha? Is that true?" Aisha buried her face in her hands, her body shaking. "I also know Devonte Flood was HIV positive and concealed it from both of you," Rosser continued, his words like hammer blows. "You found out you were infected. You found out he was the source. You went to his home to confront him. An argument broke out. He hit you, and you stabbed him. Is that correct?" Aisha slowly lifted her head, tears streaming down her bruised cheek. Through her sobs, a single word escaped. "Yes." Almeida let out a strangled, wounded sound, as if all the air had been forced from her lungs. "Aisha, how could you?" she whispered, the words a mix of shock, betrayal, and unbearable pain. How could both of you? I didn't mean to kill him, I swear. Aisha sobbed, turning to her sister, her face a desperate plea. I went to talk to him. He admitted it, Almeda. He knew he was sick and he didn't care. He laughed about it. He said he was going to tell you, I brought the sickness into your home. He hit me, and I snapped. You slept with my husband, Almeda said, her voice flat and dead. I'm so sorry, Aisha cried. He was paying me. I needed the money for rent. It started. Shut up, Almeda commanded, her voice suddenly like ice. I don't want to hear it. Rosser signaled to Jenkins, who quietly stepped out to call for a transport unit. Aisha Dunley, Rosser said formally, you are under arrest for the murder of Devontae Flood. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read her rights, Almeda stared at her sister with an expression that was no longer just pain, but a chilling emptiness. Her world had not just cracked, it had been obliterated. Her husband had cheated on her with her own sister. He had known he had a deadly virus and had hidden it, exposing her to mortal danger. And now he was dead, murdered by her sister's hand. A horrifying realization dawned on her, cutting through the fog of grief and betrayal. I need to get tested, she mumbled, her voice trembling. I could be infected. We'll make sure you get the medical attention you need, Rosser assured her gently. Right now, we need to take your sister to the station. Aisha didn't resist as they handcuffed her. She looked utterly broken, all the fight gone from her body. I'm sorry, Almeda, she said as they led her out of the trailer. I never ever meant to hurt you. Almeda didn't answer. She just sat motionless, staring into the space her sister had just occupied. Her life, as she knew it, was over. Her husband was dead. Her sister was going to prison for his murder, and she was now left to live with the fallout, the double betrayal, the public shame, and the terrifying possibility that she, too, carried the secret that had destroyed them all. Detective Rosser walked out of the trailer, watching the officers lead a sobbing Aisha to the patrol car. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the humid Louisiana air. It was another domestic murder, another set of broken lives. But this one felt different. It wasn't just about anger or jealousy. It was about the crushing weight of secrets. He thought about the cycle of poverty, desperation, and lack of opportunity that defined a place like Bayou's End. It was a pressure cooker. People like Devontae and Aisha weren't born monsters. They were forged into them by a life with no good options. A single lie, a single secret born of fear and shame, had created a domino effect, toppling one life after another until all that was left was ruin. The real killer, he thought, wasn't just the person holding the knife. It was the silence. It was the disease, yes, but it was also the fear that kept good people from seeking help, and desperate people from telling the truth. And in a place like this, that silence was the most dangerous weapon of all.